Canada's outgoing Heritage Minister has unveiled her vision for the future of the CBC. Pascale St-Onge says that with an increase of media control by American billionaires, the public broadcaster should act as a safeguard for our country's cultural sovereignty. I want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. She's in our nation's capital. So what do we know about this plan?
Well, it was so interesting to hear Pascale St-Onge, who is not going to run again, but sort of as her last big job here before we do head into potentially a spring election, unveiling this plan and framing it as consistent with something that was important a century ago when the CBC was first set up to offer a national Canadian voice in a world where otherwise, as people rode the railway, they had only American content to listen to. Again, Canadian sovereignty at the forefront of political conversations here in Canada. And Canada's public broadcaster, in the words of the minister, essential to having a way for Canadians to control what people can know about their own country, to not be sort of the victim of disinformation or sort of have facts defined by the algorithms of platforms controlled elsewhere, the importance of having a national broadcaster at work for Canadians as a public service, particularly in the context of, for example, national emergencies. She talked about the forest fires in Jasper last summer, for example, as a case where Canadians needed to be able to get information from a trusted source. She also talked about foreign interference and the importance of having a sovereign public broadcaster that isn't susceptible to meddling from hostile foreign states in terms of the information it carries and being accountable for that. But of course, all of this costs money. And so how to pay for it? A proposal that would dramatically alter the way the CBC Radio Canada is funded, having a per capita statutory appropriation for the CBC. Now, she suggested an amount that would be similar to what she called a national average for public broadcasters around the world, $62 per person. She says right now, what CBC receives, and public funding is some 78% of the budget for CBC Radio Canada, is more akin to $33 per person per year. She says that's more like how the U.S. Funds public broadcasting, and she says that needs to change. Canadians need to be accessing particularly news and information programming for free without commercials. And if the CBC focused on that and was funded better, that could free it from needing to use advertising, which would free up advertising dollars potentially for the private sector. But she also very much framed this proposal as far as future funding for the CBC in some stark political terms. Here's the minister.
It's important that we stop talking about defunding or funding CBC and we talk about a vision and a plan for the future of the CBC. What it could mean for Canadians, especially at a time where we know that our means of communications are controlled in most parts by tech billionaire oligarchs in the United States. It is more relevant than ever in the current context to have and to be able to rely on a public service media. And to not understand that reality shows the lack of understanding of the global context that we're in. And it shows the lack of love for our own country and for the fact that we need to be able to tell our own stories in our own way. And Radio-Canada, CBC, will never be controlled by Musk, Zuckerberg, or any other private billionaire tech oligarch.
The minister talked about the leadership role that she believes CBC Radio Canada could play when it comes to innovating in the broadcast sector, the importance of having the public broadcaster lead the way when it comes to ethics in adopting new technologies. She's also proposing some governance changes, that the head of the CBC wouldn't be appointed by the minister in the future, but would be appointed by an enlarged board, one that ideally would have representation from all the provinces and territories. She also wanted to make it clear clear that in her vision, the CBC doesn't belong to the Liberals, it doesn't belong to the Conservatives, it doesn't belong to any political party. It should belong to the people. And future changes to the Broadcasting Act, which she hopes a subsequent government will make, should make it more clear that this is a public good and not something that should be subject to budget debates or political decision-making year to year, government to government.
And meanwhile, Janice, we know that while this announcement was underway, that the Conservative Party leader was also making an announcement in Toronto, and he was asked about this.
Yeah, indeed. And it is important. Obviously, the Conservatives, according to sort of current public opinion tracking, could be the government going forward, depending on what Canadians decide in the next election. And Pierre Poilievre, in past some speeches, has talked about shutting the CBC down, turning its buildings into housing. Although last Saturday, during his rally on Flag Day, he did not talk about the CBC at all. It did come up today in a question and answer session with reporters. He was discussing examples of government waste and pointing out that CBC television programming in particular has ratings that pale in comparison to the American counterparts that on offer for Canadians, and framing that as a reason maybe to have some cuts in the future.
Almost nobody watches CBC television. They have among the worst ratings of any network, and yet Trudeau gives them billions more. We're going to cut wasteful spending, not just there, but across the government to bring down inflation, deficits, and taxes. That's common sense. Now let's bring it home.
The stage appears to be being set here for making this potentially an issue in the coming election campaign. We know that when Poilievre is speaking to Quebecers, French Canadians about the future of the CBC Radio Canada, he always differentiates between the English services and the French services and vows to maintain Radio Canada. We know cultural policy, a very potent political force, particularly in the politics of Quebec. But it isn't clear that it's possible to separate the two. What St-Onge lays out today does talk about having some clearer language about editorial independence for the programming between the English CBC and the French Radio Canada, but she is not talking about separating this into two entities such that you could keep one open and close the other one. This is an organization where, particularly in terms of the technology and the broadcasting infrastructure, things are highly integrated. It is not clear that you could end one and continue the other. Also not clear that you could pull the public broadcaster out of private broadcasting, the broadcasting system as a whole in this country, and have it still be viable in terms of the way broadcasters generally share resources to be able to deliver stories to Canadians, particularly in remote parts of Canada, where only CBC has the mandate to be there regardless of sort of market forces. So all of this shaping up to make potentially a debate over the future of the CBC, something that becomes a debate about the future of broadcasting in Canada as a whole, with this now sovereignty lens on all of it. We will see sort of the extent to which this is on the minds of voters going forward.
This, Janice, that is the CBC's Janice McGregor reporting from Ottawa.